Crossing the Plains to Utah. This is a true story about the first crossing of the plains in 1847 by my third great-grandfather, Lyman Curtis. It was condensed by me, John Hoopes, from a daily journal written by Levi Jackman. The original handwritten journal is at the BYU Library. The company master assigned Levi Jackman, who was traveling alone in his well-built and supplied wagon, to take Lyman Curtis, who was also traveling alone, with him, so they were together as partners for the entire trip. Lyman Curtis only had his horse, his bedroll, and his gun, with which he was an excellent marksman, and had been called by Brigham Young to go as a hunter for the company. Lyman was to go to Salt Lake and immediately return for his family. Lyman did not write a journal that we know of, but Levi mentioned Lyman many times in his detailed journal. It is interesting that towards the end of his life, Levi Jackman, who settled in Salem, Utah, just north of where I live, later married Delia Deliverance Byam Reed Curtis, who is my third great-grandmother. She was a widow. She had married Lyman Curtis' father, Nahum, after he died, and to whom she was sealed in 1869. Here is Levi's story. I left Keg Creek, Pottawatomie County, Iowa, at the end of March 1847, with Brother Brigham's company to cross the plains to the Great Salt Lake. My wife could not go, so I went by myself to prepare for her coming. Lyman Curtis was called to go as an advance scout and hunter to provide fresh meat. I was 14 years older than Lyman, and we were in the 13th 10. Brother Brigham organized this company with captains of 100, 50, and 10, like Brother Joseph organized Zion's Camp. This is where Curtis and I became acquainted. This rugged Zion's Camp journey, the same distance as from winter quarters to the Salt Lake Valley, chastened, polished, and spiritually refined many of the Lord's servants. Our captain of 10 was John Brown, who was also a good hunter. We had 2 of the 3 Negro saints in our 10, Harkley and Oscar Crosby. They were good men. Other good people in our company, in addition to Brother Brigham and his wife Clarissa, included Wilford Woodruff, Orson Pratt, Ezra T. Benson, Truman O. Angel, Heber C. Kimball and his wife Ellen, William Clayton, Orson F. Whitney, and Joseph's old friend, Orrin Porter Rockwell. We took, carefully loaded in my wagon, bread stuff to last 18 months, some beans, a little pork, but no other fresh things, as we weren't able to get them. We didn't know what we would have to contend with on the journey, only that we must go and that the Lord would preserve and protect us. We arrived at winter quarters on March 31st and left on April 3rd. On the 6th we arrived at the Elkhorn, where we crossed the creek on a raft and waited for the remainder of the camp to assemble, including Brother Brigham. On Saturday, April 10th, we learned we were 1,330 miles from the mouth of the Bear River, where it flows into the Great Salt Lake. We learned this from accounts of John Fremont, a well-known explorer of the Rocky Mountains. On Monday, April 12th, Brigham Young and the other apostles in our company went back to winter quarters to hold a council with the remainder of the 12 apostles, who had just come from the east. There were 63 wagons in our camp when they left. We waited for them. Thursday, April 15th, Brother Brigham and the others returned. The next day the camp was organized and started. We went 7 miles and camped. Now we had 73 wagons and 143 men, 3 women and 4 children, 2 of them 6 years old. The weather was cold, ice 3/4 of an inch thick in the mornings, no grass for our teams, and we had to chop cottonwood for the animals to eat. Wednesday, April 21st. Cold wind and signs of rain. About 10 a.m., we saw some Pawnee Indians. A few came out and met us and seemed friendly. The heads of the bucks were shaved, except for a strip about 2 inches wide down the middle, standing up like a rooster's comb. Their skin was lighter than most Indians. They wore breechclouts and a buffalo skin robe over their shoulders. Some had leggings. They wanted presents, but when we did not give them as much powder, tobacco, etc. as they wanted, they went away. Some of them stole a few things, such as bridles, etc. Because we were afraid the Indians might attack us, We had 50 men on guard through the night. Thursday, April 22nd. We crossed the Beaver Fork, about 3 rods, which is 49.5 feet wide and 2 feet deep or less. The banks were high and steep, and we had to attach ropes to the tongues of the wagons and have men help the teams up. Friday, April 23rd. We went about 7 miles and spent the rest of the day preparing to cross the river again. We camped below the old Pawnee town, which had about 140 lodges. Last winter, when the Pawnees were all gone hunting, the Sioux Indians came and burned the town, leaving only the chief's lodge. Tuesday, April 27th. We went south to the Platte River. We had been feeding our animals some of our breadstuff, as there wasn't enough grass for them. Here we saw our first signs of buffalo. It was hard to find any firewood, but we found a few dry willows. We killed an antelope, which is the first game had been killed since we started. When we stopped, a gun was carelessly discharged and broke a horse's leg. This was the 4th horse lost since Friday. On that night, one of Brigham's own horses got hung by its halter. Saturday, May 1st. It was windy and cold, but about 9 a.m. we saw about 50 buffalo. We tried to get some, but did not get any. But after this, we saw hundreds of them and got 5 old ones and a few calves. We also passed through a prairie dog town, which covered many acres. Just before sunset, we got in our buffalo meat and had a fine feast that night. We went about 12 miles today. Sunday, May 2nd. Our camp had the appearance of a meat market. Everyone was working on their buffalo meat, cooking, drying, or making ropes of the hides. The ice was about 1/2 inch thick this morning, but when the sun came up it was warm and pleasant. We had been living on cornmeal bread and water porridge for some time, but now we had meat to eat, which we enjoyed. Before we had meat, we sometimes were able to get fresh milk from our captain of 10, John Brown. We appreciated his kindness in giving us the milk to go with our bread. Monday, May 3rd. The camp stopped to do some blacksmith work and let the teams rest, since it was the best place of grass we had found. Today, a company of about 20 hunters discovered a lot of Indians who tried to surround us, but we escaped to safety. We killed 3 antelope and about as many buffalo calves. We saw smoke ahead and learned that what little grass there was would all be destroyed by fire, which would make it hard for us. Tuesday, May 4th. We learned the Indians had set fire to the grass. We saw a small company of traders passing down the other side of the river from us. One of them came over and told us the grass was good on the other side, but our leaders decided it would be better if we stayed on this side of the river to make it easier for our brethren who would follow us. May 5th. After traveling about 10 miles, we had to stop because of the smoke. The wind had blown a furious gale all day. We camped close to the river and put our teams on a small island where there was grass. Another buffalo and 5 calves were killed today. RT. We now had plenty of good meat. Friday, May 7th. We started late so the teams could eat their fill. The Indians had camped along the way, and we used sticks they left behind, as well as buffalo dung, for our fuel. There were so many buffalo we had to stand watch to keep them and our cows from running together, as we did not want to lose any cows. We went 9 miles today. Monday, May 24th. It snowed a little and we could not keep warm, and the road was quite sandy. We saw some more Indians. When they saw us, they hoisted the American flag, and we answered it with a white one. They were quite friendly. We traveled 16½ miles today. William Clayton had devised a way of measuring the distance we traveled with a device called a roadometer. Tuesday, May 25th, some Sioux Indians and squaws came to our camp and wanted to trade. We traded some cornmeal and bread, and in exchange got buffalo robes. They were good-looking people and were well-behaved, dressed neatly and clean, and acted like gentlemen and ladies. Saturday, May 29th. This morning, Brother Brigham, after the rain stopped, called the camp together and reproved some of the men sharply for indulging in things that were leading them astray, like dancing, card-playing, dice, and using bad language. He warned them of the distress that would come to them unless they repented and reformed. After much good instruction and admonition, he asked the men to covenant that they would reform, which they did. He then said that tomorrow, Sunday, would be a day of fasting and prayer and for baking bread. After noon, we traveled 8½ miles. It rained hard before we camped, but stopped before sunset. Sunday, May 30th. We had our usual Sunday meeting. We fasted and prayed and had a good spirit, and many of the brethren expressed their determination to do better. Wednesday, June 2nd. We had to cross the river. The friendly traders had a flat boat, which cost $15 to use for the crossing. Thursday, June 3rd. We crossed the river, but were hindered by the rain. Friday, June 4th. We finished crossing the river. Here 3 men in our camp who had been in the Mormon battalion left go to 180 miles to Pueblo to get their families. A few saints, with several wagons and 1 cart, who had wintered at Pueblo, joined us today. Today we learned how the Indians bury their dead. They roll them up in a blanket or buffalo robe and lash them into the forks of a tree high up from the ground and leave them that way. Friday, June 11th. The weather was good, and so were the roads. We killed more antelope and deer. Our bread was running out, so we had to eat more meat, which gave us bowel complaint. There was a pioneer behind every bush. We traveled 17 miles today and camped on the river bend, where we overtook company of Gentiles going on to Oregon. Saturday, June 12th. I was very sick today with bowel complaint, but we went 11 miles and reached the main ford. The river was so high we couldn't cross it. We had brought a leather boat from winter quarters and used it to cross the river. The pioneers going to Oregon traded some good provisions with us, which we much needed. Sunday, June 13th. We held a good meeting, where Brothers Brigham, Heber C. Kimball, and Orson Pratt gave us good instructions. We each got 5½ pounds of flour, 2 of meal and bacon, which we needed. We had been feeding a lot of our food to the teams to keep them alive. The Lord has blessed us and preserved our lives. Monday, June 14th. We used pine and fir poles to make rafts and cross the river with our wagons. In the afternoon there was a thunderstorm with heavy wind which stopped us. Wednesday, June 15th. We traveled 27½ miles and then stayed at this place until Sunday, crossing the river and trading some more with the Oregon companies. Sunday, June 20th. Because there wasn't any grass, we traveled to Willow Springs, arriving at noon. Gravelly hills and a sandy bottom made it very hard for our wagons to travel. Had meeting in the afternoon. Monday, June 21st. There was frost this morning, strange for June, and we found some saleratus, which is good for baking. Sunday, June 27th. This morning was cool and pleasant. There is still snow in the mountains. We met another company from Oregon, and one old mountain man gave us a gloomy account of the country around Bear River and the Salt Lake. Monday, June 28th. This afternoon, we met Captain James Bridger of Fort Bridger, who also gave us much information about the Salt Lake Valley, which wasn't favorable. Everyone was telling us our destination was not good, and this was disheartening. We traveled 15 miles today. Wednesday, June 30th, we came to the Green River at noon. We made some rafts to cross the river. This afternoon we met up with Brother Samuel Brannan, who had taken a shipload of saints from the east around the Horn to settle in California. He told us how good California was and tried to persuade Brother Brigham to go on to California instead of to the desolate Salt Lake Valley. Brother Brigham still wanted to go to the Salt Lake Valley. He had seen it in vision, as had Brother Joseph. Thursday, July 1st. Today we crossed the Green River, and it was a lot of hard work. Sunday, July 4th. We traveled 3 miles and sent 5 men back to meet the company that was coming after us, to give them instructions and guide them on. The weather was warm, and quite a few in our company had come down with mountain fever. They would usually get better in 2 or 3 days, but folks got worse and died from it. Wednesday, July 7th. On Monday, I became violently ill with mountain fever, and several others came down with it. The stony ground on which we traveled is very hard on those sick folks who have to ride in the wagons. We crossed Black's Fork a number of times and camped near Fort Bridger, traveling 17¼ miles today. The fort consisted of 3 log rooms and a small yard, enclosed with logs pointed up with sharp ends, called pickets. Monday, July 12th. Today Brother Brigham became ill with the mountain fever when we stopped at noon. I was still so sick I could hardly walk. Because of the sickness in the camp, it was decided to stop and rest for a day or two. However, Lyman and a few men went out to work on the road ahead of us. We went 16½ miles today. Wednesday, July 14th. Went 14 miles today and struck the Weber Fork and camped. Thursday, July 15th. We wound our way up a ravine to the top of a hill, which was very difficult to ascend, for about 7 miles, then descended, which was equally bad, and camped, having gone 12 miles. Today I became very sick with the fever, and Lyman was not yet well, which made things look rather gloomy for us. Tuesday, July 20th. Our journey for several days had been very gloomy. We traveled up mountains so high and ravines so crooked that we couldn't see very far ahead, and the going was very difficult. But we found more timber than we had seen since leaving winter quarters, although much of it had been burned by fires. After getting to the top of the hill, we had a long, steep hill to go down. Thursday, July 22nd. Today, some of those who had been sick caught up with us, but some had to stop today because they were too sick to travel. The road was so bad we were only able to go about 4 miles. But when we finally got through the canyon, we now for the first time entered the valley of the Salt Lake. We were filled with joy and rejoicing and gave thanks to the Lord, who had preserved us and brought us to this place. We could see the Great Salt Lake and the valley extending far to the north and to the south. We didn't see much timber, but there was plenty of grass and some brush for fire. Tonight we built a large sagebrush fire that could be seen by the others still camped in the canyon. Friday, July 23rd. Early today we went with Brother Parley Pratt and others to explore the valley. We went a short distance to a small grove on a little stream and camped. Later Brother Pratt called the camp together as Brother Brigham was still behind us because he was sick. Brother Pratt dedicated this country to the Lord. We then commenced plowing to put in a little early corn, buckwheat, potatoes, peas, beans, etc. The soil was good, and before night we had put in the seed. We thanked the Lord that we could worship God unmolested, as we had been in Nauvoo and Missouri. Brother Clayton, with his roadometer, measured that we had gone 1,040 miles from winter quarters. Saturday, July 24th. Lyman went back up the canyon to help those who were behind us. About noon, Brother Brigham's company arrived. He was still down with the fever, but was able to raise up in the buggy and see the land, and said, "This is the right place. Drive on." Now, with Brother Brigham, we had a time of rejoicing together without restraint. He showed us a place for a permanent settlement and said the men should have their land set off and each one manage his own affairs and work for himself, etc. I went with several brothers further exploring the country and found that there was a large amount of timber in the mountains, but it was hard to get. Sunday, July 25th, a day of prayer and rejoicing. Surely the Lord was with us. Tuesday, July 28th. We have been working very hard to settle this place. More saints are on their way. Today was my 50th birthday. In the evening, Brother Brigham called the camp together, and we listened to the men, who had been exploring, give their reports. They had found no other place that looked so good as this one. Many of the brethren expressed their feelings, and all seemed to feel that this was the place to stop. Brother Brigham said he also knew it was the place for the city, because he had seen it in a vision before, and that we were now standing on the southeast corner of the temple block. He said many other prophetic things, which did our hearts good to hear. Under Brother Brigham's direction, we raised our hands to the square to vote to sustain him that this was the place the Lord wanted us to settle. Brother Brigham then told the men that they should build a fort for protection from the Indians. It should be made of sun-dried brick, 40 squares of land, the walls 10 feet high, which would form the back of the houses inside, and to have one large gate on each side of the square. Never was a colony settled under so many disadvantages as this. The country was truly forbidding. The face of the earth had the appearance of a barren desert. No grass, only on the streams on low ground. Nothing green on the remainder. The old mountain men that we had met on our journey warned us that no grain would grow here, for they had tried it, and from what we saw, it seemed they might be right. All the men had was in their wagons, tools for farming, seeds, clothing, and provisions, to last until they could raise some if ever that would be. The valley was out of the reach of commerce and 1,000 miles from any settlement to the east. The settlers must depend on God and do the best they could. However, the mobs would not be likely to disturb the saints here for at least a few years. So the brethren took courage and went to work, some at farming, and some to work on the walls of the fort that Brother Brigham saw in vision. Shortly after we arrived in the valley, a part of the Mormon battalion arrived, which was joyful to us. Brother Brigham sent some of the brethren, including Lyman, back to winter quarters so they could get back before winter to take care of their families. I only had provisions to last about 6 or 8 days, but Brother Kimball advised me to stay, for to go back would be like going back to the land of sorrow and death.